You're listening to Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. Hello, tea sippers. Welcome to a brand new season of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. I'm your host, Mark Long, coming to you from Madison, Wisconsin, but most importantly, coming at you to spill all this tea that's been in the pipeline. This season of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long, we're focusing heavily on politics once again, but we're going to emphasize voting. And why? It's because it's midterms year. It's a crucial election. We have a lot going on at the Capitol, but most importantly, a lot going on policy-wise with the cost of living. And it's important to start talking about current issues that are impacting us locally and nationally. But most importantly, before we kick into gear when it comes to politics, I want to emphasize that it's Pride Month, so happy Pride to everyone. I hope you're celebrating Pride in whatever way you feel is safe for you to do so. And most importantly, be who you are for your Pride, honey. This is what I'm talking about. Like, we get a month out of the year to completely celebrate and embrace ourselves, but don't forget, you are who you are through and through 365 days of the year. So if you have the opportunity to embrace who you are and be in a comfortable place to do so, do it. Now, before we dive into some of the Pride happenings here in Wisconsin, I also want to talk a little bit about the current election here locally, but most importantly, what's happening with the primaries all over the country. Take a quick listen to this update from MSN Now.
We are now 153 days away from the midterms, and after one of the busiest primary days of the year, they're still counting ballots in the state of California. But here's what we know tonight. Republican Steve Hilton and Democrat Javier Becerra are leading the race to replace outgoing Governor Gavin Newsom. Incumbent Karen Bass has advanced to the runoff in the hotly contested Los Angeles mayor's race, and on November 3rd, she will face either former reality star Spencer Pratt, a Republican or progressive Nitya Raman, who is on LA's city council. Also last night, Trump's endorsement streak ended in the state of Iowa. Congressman Randy Feenstra lost the Republican gubernatorial primary, which means Zach Lane will face Democrat Rob Sand in November.
All right, tea sippers, there's a lot to get to in regards to what's happening in the country, and that was MSN Now. I know you all watch Rachel Maddow and all those shows. They do a pretty good job covering what's happening around the country in regards to the primaries and the voting results. I want to get into a little bit more information here. So CNN is reporting, based off everything that's happening, that post-Supreme Court decisions that we talked about last season are having a huge implication on current elections. We know that gerrymandering is taking place, especially at the state level, where the maps show that a lot of the gerrymandering and voting rights weakening policies are definitely leaning in favor of Republicans right now. But most importantly, it's always good to kind of look at this from a different angle. Now, what does that mean long term? We know that Republican legislators, according to CNN, in Louisiana, Tennessee, Georgia, South Carolina, Alabama, and Florida are pushing for new maps, which would greatly reduce minority representation and eliminate a lot of Democratic seats. We also know that with the flip for Democrat seats to Republicans in Florida, that there's a lot happening in regards to the legality of it all, but when there's a red state at play, I'm sure there's a lot less control that Democrats have in regards to making those decisions. Now, CNN also noted that Texas pretty much has been pushed to redistrict several times, especially with a mid-decade redistricting plan, that they were talking about in regards to broadening their position to lean more MAGA. Now, that the efforts to make that happen have been somewhat back and forth, especially with what's happening with the current governor's race. We know that there's a polarizing figure who is running for governor who shall remain nameless because I do want to name him. ABC is also reporting to us, you all, that there has been a lot happening in regards to changes in this primary season, but most importantly, the tilting of the maps towards GOP. So a lot of outlets are reporting on this right now, and we know that Trump has encouraged Texas to redraw their map, but he's also signaling the Republicans still hold a slight overall edge nationally in this redistricting battle. Now, that shouldn't make us as nervous as what that means, because these numbers are based on the current representation, but they're not based on the people who are actually going to go out and vote, based on affordability and what's happening in their bank accounts and their cost of living and gas prices and that kind of thing. There's a whole lot to consider here. So yeah, the current wave of redistricting activity is definitely being driven by the Republicans. But most importantly, I think we need to start looking a little bit more locally to see how we can push back against this narrative with MAGA. So let's talk local elections. So let's talk about David Crowley, Francesca Hong, and Tom Tiffany, who I believe are the front runners now. WISN is reporting on the Democratic side that David Crowley and Sarah Rodriguez are the most competitive right now. But there's been some talk about how Hong in Madison, Wisconsin can actually relate to her constituents. But most importantly, she's likely to appeal to progressive and Madison area voters. So we know with the results last time, there's an entirely blue wave in Milwaukee and Madison in regards to leaning more towards Democrats. But we're not looking to see if the numbers are showing that that's going to happen on a state level. But what we are seeing is that there's a clear GOP frontrunner with Tom Tiffany right now. And then there's a top tier Democrat who has raised a lot of money and who is one of the strongest fundraisers right now. And that's David Crowley. Now, with that being said, WISN also directly reported that there's some partner outlets such as Up North News and Wisconsin Politics that have reported that heading into 2026, Crowley has raised the most money, which means he's also outraised other Republicans in the same period, which is actually very, very important to note because the funding efforts do make a difference for local elections because there's more opportunity, there's more connections locally, and there's more opportunity to spread the word about your platform and what you got going on. So I want to talk a little bit more about what that means, but let's dive into some of this local news in regards to David Crowley and what he's been up to.
So you grew up here in Milwaukee, served in the state assembly representing a Milwaukee district, now Milwaukee County executive. Tell me a little bit more about how you would represent the whole state, communities that look very different from Milwaukee if you were governor.
Being Milwaukee County executive, I represent 19 different cities and villages of all different sizes. And so not all of our communities, you can pick a cookie cutter solution and say, this is what we're going to do. You have to go inside these communities and listen and have conversations, develop relationships, and develop trust. The issues that we have fought for, affordable housing, addressing the opioid epidemic, making sure that people have access to mental health care. These aren't Democratic or Republican issues. These aren't Milwaukee issues. These are issues that every Wisconsinite cares about.
Wow, so I will say I'm very impressed by David Crowley and his background and how he's able to speak to connecting with people in communities that you need to basically start building trust and making it seem like you are here for them and not necessarily for all the culture wars, but just the cost of living, affordability, how people are going to be able to sustain work due to the unemployment crisis and everything that's been happening across the state. But, other than that, I also like the fact that David is able to speak to people who are able to draw from his experience. He comes from the Milwaukee area. He doesn't come from an affluent background. He understands what it's like to live in communities and work hard and also relate to people who are just looking to get by. And I think that's what a lot of Wisconsinites can relate to. I do want to pivot to Hong. So Hong appeals strongly to the Madison area voters because her identity, right, her record, and her policy agenda. And it aligns with the culture of Dane County. And we know that there's been a lot of heat recently with the personal debt lawsuit, which was already taken care of. But a lot of Madisonians are able to look past some of that because when it comes to affordability and when it comes to paying back bills, that's a lot that especially the working class can relate to. A lot of us across the state have lived off our credit cards with the cost of living going up, but most importantly, grocery prices, gas prices, you name it, and just general things with the tariffs that have happened. So Madison voters tend to reward candidates who feel more community oriented, and I have learned that since moving here. And I think Hong is a democratic socialist, so she can speak to that experience and her left populist platform and her ideologies in regards to being loyal to Madison, but just kind of how she's a natural fit for a lot of people who live here. Hong also speaks to universal childcare. She talks a lot about paid family leave and also this opposition to hyperscale data centers, which is a major local issue. We know that she's also pushing for the legalization, of marijuana across the state, recreational and for health purposes. And in regards to her $30,000 credit card debt, her campaign has spoken about this several times, saying that 80% of Americans struggle with this, which is absolutely relatable. And obviously, a lot of voters value authenticity over this need to vilify people who have bills and payments that are due. So I don't think that's going to necessarily impact her negatively. I think when it comes to David Crowley, with his ability to raise funds and reach these small town communities, but outside of the Milwaukee area, I think that's super important in terms of getting your name out there. I'm nervous that Hong isn't going to relate to a lot of people across the state in general, because we know a lot of Republicans are still closely aligned with MAGA, but most importantly are aligned with Trump's agenda in terms of how he is expecting prices to go down. We know that there's not really anything that we're seeing here and this impacting us every day. A lot of average Americans, a lot of average Wisconsinites don't really care about the war right now. We just want our prices down. We want the war to end. We don't want us to be in conflict with any country, because that's not very America first. So I want you all to take all these notions going into the election this year. I'm going to continue to cover David Crowley and Hung as we get closer to deciding who I'm going to vote for, most importantly, but who is going to be taking the lead in terms of the primaries come this November. And I think it's important for us to dive into more information that's happening nationally. Also, for those of you who follow local news, I don't know if you all heard about the Minocqua Brewing Company owner, Kirk Bangstad or Bagstad or whatever his name is, but he doesn't qualify for governor, which is actually good because he does have a problematic background. But most importantly, he is a perfect example of someone who is very progressive, but is also very problematic. I believe you can be progressive and liberal and stand for what you stand for. I'm very, very, very liberal myself. But also, there should be time for you to be a good person. And I think that comes hand in hand on both sides. Now, I will say this. Anybody is better than Donald Trump. But when it comes to a local election, I want our governor to be someone that could be relatable, but also someone that can meet people where they are and not necessarily have a background of just being a douche. So, okay. Tea sippers, let's shift gears a little bit. So, speaking of being a douche, Donald Trump is probably really, really upset right now because the SAVE Act is not doing that great. In fact, the SAVE Act just failed. So let's take a quick listen to this update.
Huge loss for Trump tonight. The SAVE Act has failed again. 4 Republican senators have broken from the White House and voted against the SAVE Act tonight. Another stunning loss, another example of Republicans breaking from Trump as the president becomes a lame duck president. So tonight, 4 Republican senators, Lisa Murkowski from Alaska, Susan Collins from Maine, Tom Tillis from North Carolina, and Mitch McConnell from Kentucky, voted against an amendment to the ICE reconciliation bill to fund ICE and CBP that would have pushed forward the SAVE Act. Well, they said no, and the amendment failed. And as a result, Trump, who has been desperately pushing this voter suppression bill, well, he's not going to be too happy because it's dead again inside the United States Senate, and his own party did it to him. Spread the word. Subscribe to my Substack, link in bio to support my work. Follow along for all the news you need to know about.
Tea sippers, that was Aaron Parnas, and if you haven't checked him out, you should. I think he's really great and he gives good updates. So basically, Republicans are revolting against this lame duck president, as Aaron put it, because he is a lame duck president. He's not making good decisions, and clearly Republicans are starting to know that. So those 4 senators, or Senate Republicans, if you will, were Murkowski, Collins, McConnell, and Tillis, who joined Democrats to strike down an effort to attach the bill to nearly $70 billion to ICE, which is absolutely insane, considering the fact that this is something that has been talked about for a while, right? Of giving more funding to them instead of taking the funding and using it for something that is actually going to help make sure people get their asylum needs met and make sure that there's a legal process that is better for people to come into this country. So what Newsweek has been telling a lot of people around, and I'm not really a huge fan of some of these outlets, but they basically are saying that if this legislation is passed, it will require voters to show proof of identification, such as a passport or a birth certificate. It will also be required to do this with voters who are registering to vote, but also it would have to be something that will have to be taken into effect immediately. So there's no waiting period. It will be something that will take into place right now. They're also talking about how these 4 senators are basically saying that this was just illegal for them to put more funding in the pockets of ICE, considering the fact that the number 1 priority right now for Trump is to urge his allies to basically pass this measure so that they can become aligned with his ideology, but most importantly, keep him in power and keep Republicans making decisions in the White House. The Save America Act also emphasizes the fact that all voters must show their ID, as we talked about, that there's no mail-in ballots, that no men and women's sports is on the ballot, and they think that this is going to be something that must be emphasized, and we have to get to the polls and vote it out. It's just very conspiracy-esque. And obviously, there's a lot of push on the right now of no transgender mutilation surgeries for children, which we all know that that's not happening at the rate that the Democrats, that the Republicans are making it seem so. So what does this mean? So this means a lot in regards to pushing back against Trump, but most importantly, it comes to show that Trump is starting to lose grip of his party. We know that the GOP lawmakers, right now are signaling that there is growing tension within the Republican Party, but most importantly within Congress. So we know that this is a fail for Donald Trump. We know this is a fail for those on the right who are thinking that the MAGA grip on the nation is as strong as ever. And we know that that's not the case. We know that people are wanting to see our federal dollars get put into place to benefit the lives of the American people. And right now, the party who is against free handouts, as they like to put it, has no problem making things harder for minorities to vote. And also for people to consider the cost of living and taking their vote to the polls to make sure that people can live a sustainable life in a country that is supposed to be based on freedom and the ability to afford life and go on vacation and be a middle-class American and have a good sustainable community around you. And it's hard to do that when the prices are high, when grocery prices are still through the roof, and we see that gas prices have not gone down since this awful war. And speaking of this pointless war, we know that Iran and Trump, or should I say Trump, has not reached a deal with Iran because there's no peace deal. There's no peace deal. There's no tangible progress on anything. The ceasefire is extremely fragile right now and is repeatedly being violated in Hezbollah, obviously, and we know that the Israel-Lebanon ceasefire terms have been rejected. We know that Israeli forces continue to strike in South Lebanon, and that also the U.S. Central Command says that Iran's claims of firings on U.S. warships are false, and they're emphasizing how delicate the ceasefire is. And we all know that, there are things happening, and that there actually have been U.S. vessels, if you will, that have been fired or targeted by Iran. So with nothing happening there, we know that this doesn't mean anything great for us here in the United States. Obviously, this means that we're going to see prices continue to go up. Trump is claiming that gas prices are likely going to fall because he is signaling to the American people that there will be a deal that is going to be reached. Trump claimed that talks are continuing at a rapid pace. He's also talking about that fighting continued anyway and the shooting will stop eventually. But obviously, I don't believe anything that comes out of Trump's mouth, and neither should any of the American people. So now that we know that negotiations are stalled or suspended, we know that this is going to have an impact on us here with this pointless war that's happening for no entire reason. So to put a button on this, I would say, tea sippers, as tensions are rising overseas, as nothing is happening there, just remember this when it comes to election time, because if you are not able to afford things the way you used to, or things just seem so odd with the policies right now. We know that a lot of weird loopholes have happened with this administration, and especially the lack of focus on America first and benefiting the lives of us as Americans. Just keep that in mind when you go to the polls, because obviously this president is probably one of the worst in U.S. history. All right, so make sure you all vote. But I want to switch gears to something more locally. So I remember last season we talked about Ridgeland Farms over in Blue Mounds here in Dane County, and there's this huge issue about animal abuse happening and animals being neglected, but most importantly, these beagles. Currently there's 135 more beagles that were still there, but there's a recent update this week that they're been ordered to be released. Take a listen to this.
Farms will release 135 more beagles.
News 3 Now's Sarah Carlson is in the studio with us with more details about the beagles release. Sarah?
Hi, Susan and Eric. That's right. There were still 650 beagles left at the farm following the release of 1,500 dogs last month. But more protesters gathered at the farm last weekend to demand their release. And today, we learned the Dane County Humane Society will help move 135 beagles away from Ridgeland. The DCHS will work with the Beagle Freedom Project, Center for a Humane Economy, Wisconsin Puppy Mill Project, and Wisconsin Federated Humane Society to place 68 beagles. A Dane County Humane Society spokesperson said about 10 will stay here and be placed with Wisconsin families. Now, Ridgeland was accused of abusing the animals it breeds for research. As part of a settlement, the farm agreed to hand over its breeding license by July 1st, 2026. However, it was allowed to keep dogs for research purposes. Now, 67 dogs will be transferred to Big Dog Rescue's Florida campus tomorrow. The dogs will be spayed or neutered and prepared for adoption. And by the way, Dane County Humane Society will be reaching out to potential adopters who submitted interest forms the last time for the beagles once the dogs are ready for adoption.
So we've been following this story with Ridgeland Farms for some time, and especially the activists here in Madison, Wisconsin, have been taking it upon themselves to really fight for the release of these beagles. So it's good to finally know that they're being released and that there's other states and other organizations that have stepped in to give these dogs a new home. Most importantly, again, if you're looking to adopt, the Humane Society were accepting forms for specifically for these beagle adoptions, and you might be able to reach out to them to see if there's any way that you can get on the list to get a beagle. I'm just so happy every time I hear good news like this, because I feel like when it comes to animal abuse, you have to be a special kind of like ridiculous and like insane, because you're willing to do something that's very helpless. But most importantly, to keep them for research purposes, knowing the conditions that they're in, is just completely ridiculous. I'm glad that this action was taken and that a lot of people in Wisconsin can now breathe, because we don't want to be thrown this news about these animals being abused on top of living in a country where a pedophile is president. So not sure where the link between the two are, but I will say the link between criminal behavior is very consistent amongst a lot of people who think they can get away with it. So kudos to the activists for making that happen, and let's shift gear into more news. Okay, we're shifting gears, but we're only shifting gears because it's Pride Month, right? And I am going to echo and say that all month, so you all might as well just get used to it. Before we dive into some history here and highlight a trailblazer or two, I think it's good for us to focus on what's happening locally, because there's a lot that Wisconsin offers in regards to acceptance and visibility, but also maybe some policy changes that are in the works as well. And Tony Evers and the mayor and a few other local constituents and government officials, if you will, or state officials, made an appearance to hang the pride flag up on Monday. Take a listen to this.
Madison is kicking off this Pride Month with a colorful tradition. Governor Tony Evers helped kick off Pride Month today by raising the pride flag over the Wisconsin state capitol. The governor was joined by LGBTQ plus advocates for the annual ceremony. The governor said the raising of the Pride and Progress flags is both a celebration of Wisconsin's LGBTQ plus community and a reaffirmation of our state's commitment to dignity, respect, and opportunity for all.
They want to remove books and stories from shelves across the country because they tell stories of love, inclusion, diversity, and strength. Well, folks, here in Wisconsin, I promised long ago that as governor, I'd always fight to protect LGBTQ Wisconsinites with every tool and every power that I have, and it's a promise I've been proud to keep.
That was Channel 3000, News 3 Now, and I just want to say, isn't it just amazing to have a governor that gives a damn about people who are underserved and people who are marginalized, and especially the LGBTQ plus community? I think we need that more than ever right now, especially living in a purple state, if you will, if not a red state at times. Sometimes it can be difficult to find your pace and find your belonging and where you fit in. But most importantly, it's good to know that there are people at the top, especially state officials, that want to make sure that people like us know that we deserve to exist. And most importantly, just to get into some other news in regards to Pride, we know that current Dane County, I believe it was officials or board members, have decided that gender-affirming care must take place and that providers must continue to provide those resources to those who are receiving gender-affirming care. So whether that means hormone therapy or any kind of supplements or anything, like working with a counselor to talk about gender issues of that kind of thing, it's actually a really good thing that they're pushing for that to happen. So we'll continue to follow that story, but right now they're saying that providers should not be subjected to a conversation of pretty much rejecting those who are receiving gender affirming care services. So that's good for our state, and that's good for Madisonians who are really, 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 standing tall when it comes to equality and access to services, and especially when it comes to healthcare. Tea Sippers, continuing with Pride Month, I want to also make sure that we focus on some trailblazers that have paved the way for the LGBTQ plus community. But most importantly, I think it's good for us to highlight some LGBTQ plus persons of color, as we usually know that a lot of Black people get left out, right? And a lot of brown people get left out in regards to the historical context of making an imprint on communities and representation in this country. So let's go ahead and highlight some of these people for the month of June. And I'm not going to tell you who it is, but I do want you to listen to this next clip. Take a listen.
Meet Audre Lorde, the fearless poet, essayist, and activist whose words broke barriers and ignited social change. With lines like, "I am not free while any woman is unfree, even when her shackles are very different from my own," her words became a rallying cry against injustice. Born in New York to Caribbean immigrant parents, Audre transformed the adversity of racism, sexism, and homophobia into poetic resistance, turning personal pain into a weapon against societal silences. From her earliest writing, she harnessed the power of language to honor the complexities of race, gender, and sexuality. Audre redefined literary expression, infusing art with activism. In groundbreaking works like The Black Unicorn and Sister Outsider, she challenged conventions and forced society to confront its silences. With every verse, she dismantled oppressive systems and lit a guiding light for those daring enough to rewrite their own narratives. In an era when openly embracing a gay identity was radical, Audre's visibility reshaped cultural perceptions of queerness. Her candid celebration of her sexuality inspired future creatives. Writers such as Roxane Gay, Danez Smith, and Cheryl Clark have spoken openly about Audre's impact on their work, carrying forward her ethos of truth-telling and resistance through their own powerful storytelling. Audre Lorde remains a beacon of resilience, authenticity, and collective power. Her legacy isn't just a literary one, it's a movement, a call to action, and a reminder that through language, community, and courage, we can shape the future.
That was a famous LGBTQ plus and feminist activist by the name of Audre Lorde. I hope you learned a lot from that. And this is from the Female Quotient, which is it's a YouTube page that talks a lot about trailblazers, especially those who are feminists. But let's talk about the significance. So we know that Audre Lorde was born in 1934 in New York City, to Grenadian immigrants. So that's quite interesting, right? Now, we know that her career spanned not just from being a poet, but she was also a professor, a librarian, and most importantly, an activist. And her lesbian identity actually helped push some of her thoughts in regards to how she discussed Black feminist thoughts, how she talked about queer and trans liberation movements, joy. She had a lot of themes of intersectionality, anti-racism, and also spoken word. She has a lot of major works that include essays and poetries. For example, The Black Unicorn, which was released in 1978. Sister Outsider, which was an essay on race, gender, sexuality, and power. As well as The Cancer Journals, which was a groundbreaking reflection on illness, identity, and the medical system in 1980. So she made quite the impact on the United States and on women of color. But most importantly, this comes to show you how we should have more representation and how important Pride Month is to know who some of these people are and how they've shaped our political and cultural landscape. But most importantly, it's just super important to be in the know. So I'm going to always include one figure from Pride Month. Most importantly, one person who is a trailblazer, who is a part of the LGBTQ plus community, who made a difference so that we can all learn together. Speaking of learning together, again, happy Pride Month to everyone, and I hope you get an opportunity to check out some of the events in Wisconsin. I can list off a few. I'm going to go to Our Lives Magazine, which Patrick Fehrenbach is actually the creator and the owner of the magazine. So make sure you check that out and get all your information from there, as I will be doing the same. In regards to just the theme of this podcast, so the theme of season 4 is Vote 2024. Obviously, the main issues for me this election cycle, are anti-discrimination, the cost of living, and affordability. So I want to see those gas prices come down. I want to see grocery prices be a lot more affordable. I also want to see the expansion of healthcare services for small town and low income families. I think that's something that typically gets missed by a lot of people who live in metropolitan communities, but obviously those who are not bound by rural circumstances and communities where they have resources at their leisure, obviously the wealthy who don't have to worry about what it's like to live paycheck to paycheck. So just the middle of America and those who are in the middle class and making sure that our needs are being met. That's what I'm looking for in regards to this election, and that's who I think our leaders need to be in regards to their ideology and what they should represent. I think David Crowley and Hong are perfect examples of that, and we will see how the election starts to pan out. On the next episode of Clock the Tea with Dr. Long, we will dive a little bit more into some historical context in regards to Juneteenth, while also covering some more updates in regards to the election cycle here. Again, thank you for listening to Clock the Tea with Dr. Long. This is your host, Mark Long, and you know exactly where to get your tea. Have a great day. Bye. Happy Pride.